Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Meredith Albertson, Vice President of Marketing at Telium, and I'll be your moderator. Before we get started, I'd like to go over just a few housekeeping items. This webinar will last approximately 45 minutes and will be recorded. The slides and recording will be made available to you at the end of the session. We do have some related resources available in the attachments and links section of the platform, so please feel free to engage with them at any point. If there's something that you find helpful or important during this webinar, we encourage you to share socially, and you can mention @Telium. We want to hear your questions, so please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions. For any that we aren't able to answer live, we'll follow up with you after. Just a reminder that this is part 2 of our Customer Data Platform workshop. In part 1 of our CDP workshop that we held earlier today, we discussed the results of our recent State of the CDP report, including the state of the industry today, key data challenges that are facing companies, top findings from the report. We also covered some CDP use cases, tips on how to buy and implement a CDP, and meeting those ever-changing data privacy regulations. If you missed it, don't worry. There's a link to the on-demand version in the attachments and links section. And if you joined part 1, thank you for continuing along with us today. Now, on to today's presenter. David Robb is the founder of the CDP Institute. He has over 40 years of experience and is an expert in the marketing technology and analytics space. All right, so let's get started. David, over to you.
Thanks so much, Meredith, and thank everyone for joining us. So let's just jump right in here. We will start with the question of, do I need a CDP? The answer is yes. You can all go home now. Just kidding. How do you know you need a CDP is what we're really trying to ask for. So the right way to ask this is ask yourself, first of all, what do I want to do? What's stopping me from doing it? And is a CDP the best solution? Because even though we like to think everybody needs a CDP, let's not assume that, and you certainly shouldn't assume that. So let's ask 3 of those questions in a little more detail. So what do I want to do? How do I know what I want to do? Well, what marketing programs do I want to run? And how I decide what marketing programs I want to run is really a combination of my strategy, which is what I want to do, and my resources, which is what I can do. And the marketing programs should be the things that I can do, that I actually want to do, that are consistent with my strategy. Once I know my programs, I want to then go and look at the use cases, the specific use cases that are required to execute those programs. And let's just talk for a second, because I know use cases comes up quite a bit in discussion. It means slightly different things to different people. So what we mean by use case here is the specific set of processes or tasks that I want to accomplish to do a particular job. So a use case could be as broad as, oh, I want to personalize my marketing messages, or it could be as narrow as I want to send out personalized messages to sell people my paywall for my subscription product, in the US during the coronavirus. So it can be anything from very broad to very weak, but the key here is these are the things that I need to be able to do to execute the marketing programs that I want to be able to run. So if a use case is a core functionality like personalization that supports a lot of different programs, then that one use case will support multiple programs. If a use case is defined very narrowly as a particular thing that I need just for that one program, that's a narrow use case. But either way, the use case, as you'll see in the next half an hour or so, is really the core of everything that we do when we think about how we go about selecting and evaluating systems. So once I look at my use cases and I've defined the particular tasks that I need to accomplish to run my programs, the next thing I do is say, okay, what functions do I need in my systems, or what needs do I have to execute those tasks? So that's what I want to do. And it comes down to, again, what specific needs or requirements do I have that I need to do to get my job done? Once I know what I want to do, the next question is, why am I not already doing it? Because if I was already doing it, I probably wouldn't be sitting here having this particular discussion. So what are the gaps between the things that I need to do and the things that I can do, which comes down to my resources? What am I missing in my resources that I need to have happen? Those are my gaps. Pretty straightforward. And then finally, is the CDP the best solution? Well, The gaps imply a set of needs. So what are the features in the different kinds of systems that I might consider to close those gaps? How do they relate to the gaps, and which of those systems has the best fit or makes the best choice for closing those gaps? So we can look at it another way. We start with a whole set of capabilities in different systems. Each system has its own set of capabilities. Each type of system has its own capabilities. This is just one subset of the types of capabilities you might find in a CDP, or you would find in a CDP. Now we go to my needs that we've just defined. What do I need to be able to do to execute the programs that I want to run? And there are some things that I just don't need. I may not need to be able to auto add attributes in this particular case. Or even handle unstructured data. I probably am going to need real time in most cases. And then which of those can I already do? Which are my resources? Not a problem, I can already do them. And which are the gaps? These are the things that I can't do that I want to solve with whatever system I'm buying. Okay, so they are the big deal. And now what are the features in the various potential solutions and the kinds of systems that I might buy that match those gaps? Because each solution or each system or each type of system is going to have a different set of features. In an ideal world, I find something that has exactly the features I need and none of the features that I don't need, because I don't want to buy capabilities that are wasted or duplicative. In the real world, it doesn't happen quite that way. Usually I'll find something that hopefully has most or all the features that I need, but also probably will have some features I don't need. So in this particular case, whatever that second column from the left is that has 5 of the, I think there are 8 required features here. There's actually only 6, is a good fit. It's only missing 1. But there are other solutions that don't do as well. And even that one that has the 5 also has 2 or a couple other things that I don't need. So this is, again, this is the real world. You don't necessarily get a perfect fit, but you want to find the best possible fit. And because you do have to close all the gaps, you have to maybe buy a combination of systems that will taken together close all your gaps. So what did we just learn from that? We learned that the features I need depend on my gaps, which of course depend on my programs. My gaps depends on my resources available and my requirements. Too many features is a waste. That can be as bad as too few. And there's no one solution because everybody has different gaps. Everybody is going to need a different system. So there's no one best anything. So, okay. So again, we're trying to discuss, do I need a CDP? How does CDP compare with the other kinds of systems? And there are lots of other kinds of systems that manage customer data. So I can have customer data in my data lake or in my data warehouse. Well, those aren't packaged software, which is part of the CDP definition. More to the point, they often don't manage identity in a data lake or unified profiles. That's something the data scientists build after they pull the data out of the data lake. A data warehouse often is limited to structured data. So there's some gaps against common requirements, at least versus what a CDP does. In those tools, again, similarly a data hub or a data tag manager, an integration platform, those collect data, but they don't store it. They just pull it in, run it through some sort of a sorting capability and push it out to whatever process needs it. So there are often needs that I have to store data persistently over time that those systems don't need. Marketing automation and CRM systems, they're pretty limited actually in the data. They mostly work with the data that they create themselves, not so much with data they pull in from someplace else. And in particular, they're going to be pretty weak, usually when it comes into semi-structured or unstructured data. Marketing automations and journey orchestration engines, similar set of issues actually. Data management platforms, really about audiences for advertising, a very limited set of capabilities. So as you see, there are a lot of gaps there, even on those top 5 things, 6 things. Email service providers, content management systems, mobile apps, other kinds of systems really are more about delivery. So as you see in the bottom part of that chart, the stuff on the top, those 7 blue things, those are things that CDPs do, kind of core CDP capabilities. The things that about predictive model, real-time interactions, orchestration, delivery, some CDPs do, some CDPs don't. But the other kinds of systems, you'll see CRM there and marketing clouds, that's where they really shine. So we're not saying that CDPs are the best thing, and that's the only thing you need. We're seeing that there's a particular set of capabilities that you're more likely to find in a CDP than someplace else. So what that means, going back to our original thing, is the use case that's solved by the CDP, so the gaps that are most best closed by the CDP are the use cases that require that unified, persistent, shareable customer profiles, those core CDP features that none of the other kinds of systems are really likely to provide. Okay, so now we know whether I need a CDP. I need a CDP if I have requirements to provide those unified, shared, persistent customer profiles. Which CDP do I need? Well, guess what? Pretty similar set of questions. I still have to figure out what features I need. I still have to figure out my gaps. And now it's just a question of not whether a CDP in general is better than those other classes of system, but which CDP has the particular set of features that I need that makes it the best choice for me. Okay, so now we get into a slightly different set of questions. First of all, we start with the universe. There's about 100 CDP vendors in the world that we know about at the CDP Institute. And the first way you start to screen them is simply things like region and size and industry. Do they do business where I work? If I'm in Japan, I want a CDP that sells in Japan. Do they work with companies my size? If I'm a mid-sized business or a small business, I want a CDP vendor who's comfortable dealing with clients like that. And conversely, if I'm a giant enterprise, I want a CDP vendor who's comfortable with those kinds of clients. And what about industry? Do they have some skill or capability in my industry? Some CDP vendors serve a lot of industries. Telium's one of those. Other CDP vendors are very specialized. They only do financial services or travel or B2B or whatever. So I want someone who, one way or the other, has some experience in my industry. It's just a lot of advantages to having somebody who knows you. You don't have to educate them. So that kind of screening, that'll usually eliminate half, 2/3 of the vendors out there. Then what kind of CDP do I want? So what's the scope of functionality? We talked about that a little before. All CDPs do that data work. Some have analytical and campaign capabilities. Some have delivery capabilities. Let's look a little more deeply. So, okay, so all CDPs, again, do this core data processing function. They load data, they clean it, they transform it, they link it up by customer, they create aggregates like lifetime value calculations or model scores. They then expose it, and they'll actually have a segmentation capability too, so they can push out audiences rather than simply exposing it and having another system come and access their data to pull out audiences. And then again, they could just connect to your delivery systems. That's perfectly fine. But in reality, you often have other capabilities that you need to fulfill: predictive modeling, performance measurement, personalization, orchestration, budgeting, content management. So there's this intermediate set of functions. Those might be part of your delivery systems. Most, say, CRM systems can do at least some of that, or they might be part of your CDP. So the question of whether you need them really comes down to the question of whether or not you already have them. If I don't have, say, a predictive modeling capability, nice to build that into my CDP, nice to buy a CDP that provides it. So we look at CDPs based on the scope of those functions that they provide. Some only do the data stuff, and if all I need is data, that's great. Some do data and analytics, and if that's what I need, that's great. Remember before we talked about not buying more features than you need, but also making sure that you get the minimum features that you need. If I need data and analytics and campaign, then I would like to find a CDP that has data and analytics and campaign capabilities. If for some reason I'm not happy with, say, my email provider or my CRM system, I might want a CDP that does that too, or even one that has operational capabilities like e-commerce. Now, when you get into systems that do delivery and operational stuff, you know, it's probably more important to get a really great CRM than it is to get like a great CDP at that also kind of sort of has some CRM functions, because you're going to spend a lot of time in that CRM system, or somebody in your organization is. So we talk about kind of those systems having CDP inside. They have to meet the core data capabilities, or we wouldn't call them a CDP, but you certainly wouldn't buy those systems simply for their CDP functions. Okay, so now we looked at the clients, we've screened that down. I've looked at the functions and hopefully come up with the scope. That's the right scope. Now we can finally get around to features. And let's talk about use cases. We talked about use cases a little before. Let's dive a little deeper into use cases, because they are such a critical part of the vendor selection process, is defining my use cases. Most people will define anything from 10 to 30 use cases when they're selecting a vendor, because you have to have a pretty broad range. You can't just define one or two. You have to make sure that you're going to be able to meet all of your needs. So when we define a use case, we take a kind of a two-pronged approach, or two-step approach. First of all, we say, well, at the highest level, what's the problem I'm trying to solve? This one is about subscription offers. And then how am I going to solve that problem? And this way, I'm going to build some predictive models to select the best subscription offers and then deploy them. And I also want to think about what are the benefits. Kind of, is this worth doing? How am I going to prioritize this use case is really what I'm asking. So I don't want to select some random use case that's really cool and maybe is very sophisticated, but it's going to just have some tiny impact on my business because it's only going to apply to 2% of my file. So you really want to be able to think through even at the earlier stage, okay, is this really a use case that has significant business value to me? And then what are my KPIs? Once we've done that, the next step down, and this is really the hard part, I'll tell you right now, is defining specifically what are the tasks within that use case. The first thing I'm going to do is collect all that data and put it into my CDP. The second thing I'm going to do is have a machine learning engineer code my data so I can use it for analysis. The third thing I'm going to do is have that engineer actually build the model with the data that I've just prepped. And then I'm going to have my marketers run campaigns and my CDP staff is going to collect the result data. And then maybe I'll refine the model. So it's 6 tasks that are required. And you can start here and then you can begin to really dig into specifically what are the features that my CDP needs to collect that purchase and customer data. Which sources does it have to connect to? What kind of loading and transformation and data prep and all those things that we just listed, or what kind of processes do I need? So here I can actually build out from this a much more specific requirements list that I can actually begin to use to select my system, to select my vendors and see which vendors, which particular CDPs really meet my needs or best meet my needs. When we think about use cases, remember I said you have to have a bunch of them? Well, one way to make sure that you have a bunch of them, don't get too technical here, but is to think about maturity stages. There are some things that are really simple, basic. First thing you do is you get that data unified and exposed, build the CDP basically. Once you have it built, the next thing you're most likely to do is do some analytics on it. Then after the analytics comes predictive modeling and then outbound campaigns using the models and real-time interactions and omni-channel and cross-channel campaigns and message delivery. So that's a maturity model that you're going to kind of walk through step by step, although as we'll see in a minute, sometimes you jump out of order. The other thing you want to think about is where am I in the journey stage for my use case? Which part of the customer journey is the use case addressing? So am I doing a use case that has to do with brand awareness, so like advertising campaigns? Is it more about conversion? Is it more about taking my existing customers and increasing their order value or their lifetime value? Is it about retaining, avoiding churn? Is it about customer service? Is it about reducing costs? Those are all things that you might do with the CDP. So when you take your use cases, you kind of can plot them on this grid and you can see, well, yeah, okay. I don't have any use cases that have to do with retention. Is that really right? Or have I just kind of not thought about that? Maybe I want to add in a couple. One of the things that we've done at the Institute is we collect these things. We're kind of like, pack rats. And we have a collection of about 50 or so case histories that can be defined as use cases that have come from the various vendors like Telium. And we kind of plotted them on this grid, and this adds up to 100 because some of them fall into more than one category. But we see, in our little heat map here that most of the use cases or the case histories are concentrated in this particular area, right? They're kind of things that you do after the customer has already joined the file. They're not so much about acquisition as they are about customer value, customer relationship growth, and about retention, which makes sense. The CDP is about customer data, people you've already acquired. There are some uses like lookalike modeling that support acquisition, but by and large, the core of the CDP use cases do actually have to do with getting better value and retaining your existing customers. Similarly, you'll see they're all kind of focused towards the earlier stages, towards the left of that maturity model, which again makes sense. You do first things first. Once you've built the data in, then the most likely first thing you're going to do is analyze it. And it's very exciting because it's the first time that your analysts have seen this unified customer data. So there's lots and lots of interesting things that they can explore and find and generate insights that can lead to better results. Whether or not they actually use the CDP data, they just understand your customers better. There's always value in understanding your customers better. And then as you see them predictive, and then it kind of gets a little lighter as you get out. Now, the important thing to notice here is this is what we have in our little library at the CDP Institute. If I go through this exercise with companies that are thinking of deploying a CDP, which is something that we do around here occasionally, they tend to be much further to the right. They tend to focus on the campaigns and the interactions and the online channel, because those are the use cases that are top of mind to them. If you ask them, what are you going to do with your CDP? Their fundamental answer is, I'm going to do things that make me money. And I don't make money until I start running campaigns or running interactions. That's where I get real business value. So the people who buy CDPs tend to think more about the use cases that have to do with actually execution, about campaigning, as opposed to the people who actually work with CDPs and look at what people are using them for. They tend to see these earlier stage processes. So it's not that one's right or one's wrong. But the really important takeaway from that is, when you're doing your planning, even though you might want to start with the earlier stage things like analysis and predictive, you probably are going to want to at least define one or two things that are actually at the higher level of maturity, like a real-time interaction campaign or an outbound campaign, because that's where you're going to be making your money. Okay, and you do want to have some things that deliver real business value kind of early in this project, because that's going to get everybody excited. You also want to think very carefully about what those particular applications are going to be, and try to find ones that are not too demanding, that don't require 18 different data sources and 4 different departments and 200 new pieces of content and all that. I mean, those are great. You'll get to those, but try to find something that's going to be relatively easy to deploy, so you can complete that entire cycle for a few data sources and a couple, maybe one department, maybe even just one channel, and get some real value before you try to make things more complicated than necessary. So think about that as you're laying out the use cases that you're going to collect and create to do your vendor selection process, so you have a reasonable sample of things. So that use case selection, again, really important. Use cases, of course, map to features, and there shouldn't be any surprise here that going back again to our list of features, there are some features that are only required to unify and expose the data. Those are the things that are in those data CDPs that we talked about when I had another set of use cases that add analytical functions like analytics and predictive. Obviously, now I add in some new requirements for predictive capabilities when I get into outbound campaigning. There's another set of requirements about events and segments and triggers. When I get into real-time interactions, obviously I need some real-time capabilities. When I get into omni-channel, I need omni-channel capabilities. So nothing like super complex or brilliant about this particular chart, but just making the point that the capabilities, the functions you need to look for depending on the scope of the CDP. If I'm just buying a data CDP because I already have great analytical tools and great campaign tools, let me just focus on those analytical capabilities. If I really need campaign CDPs, I have to look at everything up including all those other functions. So it's, again, just another way of reminding you that you want to map the use cases to the features and the features to the products that you're assessing. So that's just a little summary chart. We start with our use case detail. We map those to the feature inventory. Now we define scenario checklists. We don't talk about that, but once I know what features I have, I need to find some way of understanding which vendors, which products support those features, and the way to do that is to define little scenario specific sets of tasks that you want the vendor to demonstrate. Okay, because unless you tell them what features to demonstrate, they will demonstrate the features that they want to show you, which will be their coolest features, which may not, in fact, be the gaps that you need to fill. So you really need to control that process as a buyer. And then once you've defined which systems fill which gaps, obviously, pick the one that has the best fit for your needs. So, key points again, the CDPs fills the gaps that block your use of your customer data. They're your gaps, so which CDP you need depends on your gaps, your use cases. Define those gaps so they drive your selection process. And again, careful selection, selecting the right tool is the key to CDP success. And with that, I think we can address some questions. Meredith?
David, thank you so much. That was really great, and I know that our audience really enjoyed that. We've gotten some great questions in, so I'm just going to start, get your feedback on some of these. I think this is a great one. How does a brand or a team evaluate whether their company is actually ready to start on this customer data platform journey?
That is a great question, because so far I've just been talking about technology, about features and gaps and use cases and all the fun stuff. But there's a lot more to this than just features. Okay, you have to have people who have the right set of skills or who you're going to train up, because you don't necessarily just have to assume everybody has the skills. You also have to have an organization that's going to have cooperation. Remember, I was talking about picking use cases that aren't too difficult. Well, the hardest thing is to get different departments across the company to cooperate. Sometimes, depends on your company. But the bigger the company, the harder that often is. So you have to have those organizational issues under control. You have to have your data quality under control. You have to have systems that are, first of all, accessible, that can even share their data. And secondly, that data in those systems actually has to be usable. And at the other end, again, your delivery systems have to be able to use the data that you've assembled in that CDP. So if they can't pull a list from the CDP or accept a list from the CDP, then all your work is for naught. The thing about those use cases and those gaps is it doesn't do you any good to fill 99% of your gaps, right? It's like having a bridge that covers 99% of the river. You're still going to fall into the water unless you cover the entire, unless you fill the entire gap. So you have to understand those non-technical gaps and fill those as well.
No, that's great, David. So you mentioned there, it seems like you're starting to talk a little bit about some of the data quality and data readiness pieces of being a big part of whether a company is actually ready to get and start with the CDP. Is there like do you have an opinion on like what the key foundation is that someone needs to get started, or how someone could check to see like, wow, like, do we have this? Are we ready? Like, is there any suggestions you'd make there?
Well, again, it comes back to our friend, the use case, right? You're going to
Mm-hmm.
look at that use case, say, well, okay, what specific data do I need? Not just, oh, do I need CRM data, but which particular data do you need out of the CRM? Do you just need names and addresses? Because actually there are lots of use cases that don't require much more than names and addresses out of the CRM. Or
Mm-hmm.
do I need to see the actual details of which web page they saw when and what was the sequence, or in the CRM, how many calls we had and what they discussed and all that. Very, very different use cases with very different sets of data requirements. And if it's those more elaborate things, well, first of all, it's a red flag, harder. But secondly, now look at it, see how complete is my data, how accurate is my data, how current is my data. There's a
Oh,
whole
that's
bunch
a great point.
of attributes you want to look at, that define data quality. And then can I get it out? Is it in a usable format? Is it all just stuck in call notes? And if it is, okay, there's technologies that can, read the call notes and extract features and stuff and sentiment and things. But, that's a particular kind of technology that if you need it, you need it, but you better know you need it. And chances are you're not going to have it out of the box. So maybe try to find a use case that doesn't require it.
Are there any other, so use cases, obviously you talked a lot about those today and how key they are to being part of this process, which I think is great. And actually something we touched on in the earlier part of the workshop today is some of those use cases and some of the purpose of them. Are there any barriers or red flags or kind of like that warning signal that would prevent an organization or a team to kind of start on this journey?
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, all the things that we just talked about in terms of, again, organizational resistance, access to data, people having us to have the attitude. Probably the biggest thing that we worry about is companies that are more channel driven than customer driven. We all want to be customer centric. It's mom and apple pie, but in reality, a lot of companies have very, very strong channel focus. We have our web guys, and our web guys do what our web guys do, and our email guys do what our email guys do, and our call center people do what they do, and the service people do what they do. And if they're not going to talk to each other or work with each other, then you still can get value, but it's going to be a different kind of value. It's going to be a different, set of capabilities. And you need to be aware of that up front. So you set your expectations appropriately, you set management's expectations appropriately, you train appropriately, you prep appropriately. So it's all about, remember we talked about the strategy and resources in that little graph earlier on. You really have to understand what your resources are. And you really have to understand what your strategy is, and you really have to understand the interplay between those two, and make sure that you're doing things that are realistic. Your resources constrain what you can do with your strategy. So make sure you're choosing realistic goals.
Well, David, that actually leads really nicely into our next question from the audience and it sounds like, a way that we need to try to get around sort of that channel expertise, but to have that success for CDP, Do you have recommendations on how teams or individual stakeholders can start to build internal buy-in? Because it sounds like that is just really, really key to this thing being successful.
It is, and what we tend to see kind of empirically is often there's one sponsor, usually at a department level, usually CDP projects, and I'm generalizing, so not always, but usually, it's the head of digital or the web guy or the email guy or somebody in particular says, if I could only get my hands on that other department's data and that data that's locked up in the CRM system or that's locked up in the web personalization or whatever it is, whatever data is not already available to me, I could do all these cool things. And that kind of tends to drive that initial CDP project. Now, of course, now they have to go and convince the other person who has that data to share it, which not everybody wants to do. They should, and I'm not saying, again, very much dependent on the organization and the culture. Also on the technology. Sometimes it's actually pretty easy to get your hands on that information. Sometimes it's a huge project, and the IT guys have to get involved, and then they have to, prioritize that with all the other things they have on their plate. And, part of the value of CDP, of course, is it makes it easier to do that. The whole point of a CDP is it's packaged software. You can drop it in and you can begin to flow data into it from other systems with a relatively low amount of IT effort. Never say never, because the IT guys have to cooperate, but it's not a big project for them. It's just a relatively small project for them with any luck at all. So that's another piece of buying you have to get. IT is always involved in this. If nothing else, they have to look at it from a security standpoint. And nowadays, privacy comes right along with that. And
Absolutely.
they get very properly concerned about keeping the company out of trouble. That's part of their job. So, they need to look very carefully. Well, is a CDP system you want to buy, is it going to follow all the rules we need to follow? So they're going to be involved. And they again, not fair to generalize, but they're in IT because they like to build systems. So often their first response, I could build that. And then, 3 years later, they've tried and they haven't. And hopefully you don't have to wait 3 years for them to figure out that, there are other things that you can be doing that are higher value that no one can buy a piece of software to do. And once they kind of come to that little realization, then they're usually much less resistant to the CDP. But again, depends on the company.
Yeah, I think I'd also add in there about, and I think this is just a little bit further down the journey, but an important tip for people is, being able to monitor and measure, the outcomes and the value journey on, and that as you're getting started with your CDP. You have to, I think it's about that evangelization of, those wins and those successes. We've had customers talk about, starting just with one other team as kind of their partner in their CDP journey and getting some of that business value, solving some of those challenges and getting that ROI, and then being able to start to evangelize that throughout other teams. And that kind of helped, have those other teams start to raise their hand and be like, well, I'm interested in this too. I'm interested in getting access to this, this comprehensive set of data. So that's just some stuff that we've seen, work as well when it comes to, the alignment and the success of this whole project. Let's see, you've got so many good questions here. Actually, David, I'm going to save you from this one because I think this is probably something more that I can take, but it's a great question about the deployment process. And unfortunately, I'm going to give probably a very unpopular answer here, but is that it really depends. I know that that's not the sort of the clean, really short answer that everyone was probably looking for, but, I think it's really true. I think there's some things that need to be taken into consideration around, the breadth of the data sources that the company has, the overall activation goals, the use cases that you're trying to build. Also, David, I think to an earlier point you made, the team's readiness to be able to buy, to be able to implement, and be able to manage the CDP. I think all of those are factors that are going to play into how long your particular deployment is. For those of you looking for a short answer, I think it could be something as quick as 4 weeks, but it could very easily take longer than that just for some of those things that I mentioned.
Well,
So
Meredith, I think you have a great future as a consultant. You got the it depends part down. That's like lesson day one at consultant school. Um, Let me actually be a little more aggressive because I don't sell these
okay.
things, so I can do that. I would say that most people should try to find something that's going to give value in, say, 90 days or so. 30, 1 to 3 months. And
Hmm.
you pick a single use case, that relatively simple, that you can get done then, and it's not going to be all your data sources, and it's not going to be connecting all of your delivery systems, but find something that actually works. So you kind of, and that's pretty common strategy. A lot of vendors do it that way. They have some incremental deployment. They say, we're going to start small, we're going to do something, but some end-to-end process that we know is going to, again, deliver some value, and then we'll grow it out that way. Because you can start with the big master plan, and again, you certainly want to have that master plan in mind of all my sources and all my things, and wow, these are all the great things I can do. But nobody has that patience, and I think we're getting less patient by the minute uh, for any number of reasons. So you want to kind of turn that question around and say, don't say how long does it take to deploy, to do a full deployment, which does indeed depend, and which could take forever, but what can I do within 90 days to get some value out of it? Let me do that first,
Hmm.
and then we grow it that way.
Yeah, David, I think that's a great point. We actually, we have a great customer, Epson America, who I just love the team over there. And they actually mapped out their use cases kind of along that same strategy that you were mentioning. Is they actually built out a use case map where the use cases all built on each other. So they could start off with a use case that wasn't hugely involved, from connecting certain data sources to activation in their email system, and they were able to get this use case up and running very quickly and delivered some really incredible value up front. And then they built on top of that use case and extended it out to include other data sources and other activation points and display. And that was a great way for them to sort of take a crawl, walk, run approach with their use cases. And to your point, delivered that initial value very quickly, which I know, especially in this day and age, is just so important.
Oh, crawl, walk, run. You've definitely gone to consultant school.
Well, at
That's
least
week two.
I'm glad I have a future. um, let's see here. Well, David, you hit on really the next question, so I hope we answered that for that attendee about the expectation to see results from their CDP. Um, let's finish up on this one, which I think is really great because I think it talks kind of hits on a buzzword we're all hearing a lot about these days, and that's machine learning. Do you think that machine learning is a feature or function that brands and teams should be looking for when they're evaluating CDPs?
Oh, now I get to say it depends, right? Uh, which is in the union contract. You have to say it at least once, because, well, if you have a great data science team who can do all this stuff and maybe don't even want to do machine learning because they're like, then maybe not, right? But most organizations, even if they have a data science team, those guys are really busy. And there are certain things that a machine learning system can take off their plate and
Mm-hmm.
lighten up their workload and let them do the more demanding things that machine learning can't do. So there's usually going to be, in most organizations, a place for machine learning. But you have to have the right data. You have to have a certain amount of volume because machine learning requires a fair amount of volume to train up the machine learning systems. So there are some situations, some conditions. You have to have a certain amount of stability because if things change all the time, then whatever the machine learning learned is not going to apply in the future. Like a lot of your machine learning models that were built, 6 months ago are not going to be real good now that everybody's working from home. So, and you for sure have to have somebody who understands what the limits are,
Mm-hmm.
who's not going to make the mistake of just blindly trusting it. The computer said it must be true. I think we've actually gotten past that. I don't think there are too many people who would say that anymore. But it's really easy to let those things get out of hand if you don't cast a skeptical eye and an educated, trained skeptical eye at that, on understanding what they're good at and what they're not good at, and only use them as appropriate. So there are a few things that might constrain whether your organization is kind of ready for machine learning.
Yeah, I too, I think it's a great question. I actually want to take a step back and reframe it a little bit, because I think when we're evaluating CDPs and we're taking that step, that it's a bit more than just like machine learning. I think it's really about buying a solution that's going to help you be ready for the future. And for me, I think that's a lot of different things. So I think, for an example, let's talk about data privacy regulations. Those are ever changing. Every day we wake up, I think we're looking at a new state that is evaluating some sort of data legislation. We saw GDPR really be the big storyline in 2019. CCPA in 2020. It's not going to be the last set that we see come out. And I think that your CDP has to help enable your brand to face anything ahead. So again, kind of going back to the future, like being just ready for anything. And that is also about machine learning. Like maybe your organization isn't ready to have machine learning as part of your strategy today, but maybe it is something that is your future. Or there's going to be a new technology or a new marketing strategy out there that we're going to be talking about in 2021. And so I think when you're evaluating CDPs and you're looking to make that investment, that it is about choosing a solution or asking the right questions so that you do buy something that you're able to keep for a really long time, and that's preparing you just for anything that you could possibly face down the road, from data privacy to machine learning.
That is really so important. I'm glad you said that, because it's not this feature or that feature. Features change. If somebody has a great feature, somebody else will copy it. But it is that kind of core foundational architecture of the system that is going to be able to adapt to the future. That's what doesn't change, because systems are designed and the internal architectures rarely change. So you want something that really is just fundamentally strong and flexible and adaptable and scalable and all the other ables that you want to put in there. That's what you really want to look at. That's going to be what's going to make a sound foundation that will allow you to grow and to adapt whatever gets thrown at it. Because we know the pace of change will only continue to grow.
Very well said. Very well said. On that note, I think we'll wrap things up. I just want to thank you, David, for your time today. It was a lot of great content, and as always, enjoyed chatting with you for a few minutes and answering some of these great questions. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Again, please be sure to check out all the related resources that we have available in the attachments and the links section. So have a great day, everyone. Thank you so much.